The Iron Jawed Angels is an incredible movie about the women who were so brave and strong and passionate about fighting for women's rights back in the day. And this movie shows just a glimpse of how hard that they really worked. The Iron Jawed Angels is about a woman named Alice Paul who strongly believed that women should have the right to vote. It was only constitutional. Men had the right to vote and they did not have to fight for it. But the thing about Alice Paul is she was ready to fight for it. She knew that this was something that needed to be done and she was not going to rest until women had the right to vote. She had very strong passion, and along with her friend Lucy Burns, she's the other main character in the movie, they were a power team together and really got what they wanted done. They had both previously worked with Carrie Chapman Catt, who was the chairman of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. She had very different beliefs than Alice Paul and Lucy Burns. She did not see the point in protesting or marching or going on strikes or any of that. She believed that the constitutional amendment that gives women the right to vote would only be vetoed if it even made it as far to the Senate, and it would just be a waste of their time. This is where she really was different than Alice Paul and Lucy Burns because she wasn't up for a fight, and this is what really set them apart. And this is when they ended up forming their own union. So it was called the Congressional Union for Women's Suffrage, and they knew that no matter what, they were going to be successful, no matter what they had to do. These activists showed their strong support by marching during President Wilson's inauguration and protesting in front of the White House during the war. This caused a lot of issues. Men were very angry about it. They quickly got very aggressive with the women who were simply standing there with each other. They were not causing any harm or danger they were not in the way, but the men were very angry with what they were trying to accomplish. So police arrived and they were arrested. They ended up being charged with obstruction of traffic, although they were not in any way of anyone or in any harm. So they pretty much were sent to prison for doing nothing. Inside the prison, times were rough, to say the least. Alice Paul started a hunger strike. When she was asked why she was not eating, she responded with the reason she was not eating was because nobody wants, or they didn't want someone to starve to death, because then that would draw more attention to them, and that's what she was trying to accomplish. She wanted all the attention to be on how poorly they were being treated and how poorly their circumstances were. So she did go on the hunger strike, and this led to terrible things. They ended up force feeding her with tubes down her throat, and eventually they were putting the tubes in her nose to force feed her with raw eggs and milk. The harsh treatment did go on for some time, but eventually the treatment that the authorities were doing was publicized on newspapers, which this put pressure on President because they were going through so much brutality that something like this cannot go unnoticed, especially from the president. And this is what it took for the women, to finally get the right to vote. And it finally got sent through, and it finally was ratified as the 19th Amendment in 1920. This movie was very eye-opening. And I was very impressed on how Alice Paul and all of the other activists, how they sacrificed so many things to achieve their goals. For example, the senator's wife, she was not supposed to have any association with this, and she had been donating money. And whenever her husband, the senator, found out, he was astonished and he could not believe that she was pretty much going against him by doing that. But she knew that it was right and that he was not right. So she was still donating her money, and she ended up going to prison over this. And she left her husband and both of her girls, her children, to join the group and to fight for women's rights. And that shows a lot, because as her husband is a public political figure, she still knew that it didn't matter. She needed to fight for what she believed in. And this relates to our textbook when we read about who remains in movements, who drops out, and why. Because there was a part in that chapter where I read that the people that are in the movements together, they eat together, they sleep together, they pray together, they sing together, and they pretty much give up their entire lives for what they believe in. And this relates to it so much, because these women did do that. They gave away everything in order to make the lives of women in the future easier, and make the lives of the women in the future able to vote and have more of a say in what's going on, rather than us not having the right to do anything. So that really reminded me of the text whenever these ladies were doing everything together. And there was a point in the movie where they had mentioned that any mothers could not go to the march because it was too dangerous. It was getting to the point where the men were attacking the women, and it got very dangerous in their crowds, even though they were not starting the violence, but the men were. These women really did do everything, and they really did risk their lives. And another example of how they were risking their lives was when the woman who she rode the horse in the marches, she was too sick to continue, and she was not sure if she would make it or anything, and she still decided that she would go and she would power through it. And she did. She still agreed to fight, although she was very ill. And that just says a lot about how passionate these women were, and how they were just doing everything in their power to make sure that women would have more of a right to vote and more freedom, because without the women, the men that were fighting or anything, like, they would not be able to do that, because the women are at home taking care of the kids, they're cooking, they're cleaning, everything. And the men during this time, I think, really took advantage of that and believed that women didn't have as much of a purpose as what they really did. And this really shows in that.